Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. This is maple syrup. Today I'm going to be planting a forest of the trees that produce maple syrup, sugar maples. About 80% of the world's supply of maple syrup comes from Canada, and of that 80%, about 90% comes from Quebec. In early spring, when the sap starts flowing in the sugar maples, the syrup that you get from that sap is a very light color with very little maple flavor. As the season progresses, the sap gets darker and darker and you get more and more of a maple flavor to it. I prefer the dark amber colored maple syrup. I think it tastes the best. It has a very strong maple flavor to it. Oh, it's so good. If you've never tried real maple syrup, not the kind they sell in stores, which is just artificial flavor, sugar and water, try the real maple syrup. It's a real delight. Oh. It's so good. Cheers. I have 11 sugar maples here, and I bought them last spring. I didn't get them potted up last spring, so they were just growing in these little pots. Today I'm going to pot them up for the first time into this seed tray. This seed tray has a mesh bottom in it. You can see it down through here. So I can just add my bonsai soil in here without a screen or anything, and it should stay in the pot. The buds on these sugar maples are swelling. They're getting very fat. So it's a good time to repot them now before the leaves come out. Down here in my native tree section, I have a black maple here, which is a relative of the sugar maple. And you can see it's leafed out already. They're just starting to come out. Sugar maples are not only famous for producing maple syrup, but they're also famous for their spectacular fall colors. They get all kinds of nice shades of yellow, reds, oranges. They look spectacular. So I'm growing this sugar maple forest not to produce maple syrup, but for the beautiful fall colors. I'll begin the work today by getting the trees out of the pots and bare rooting them. All right, here I go with tree number 1, so I'll just loosen it up in the pot, pull it out. I have no idea what the root systems will be like on these trees. I'll get my root rake out and begin raking out the soil from the roots. Getting rid of all these weeds. And see what kind of a root system I have. Maple trees generally generate pretty good root systems on them. So this was just, these were planted in a garden originally, and then dug up and put in these small pots. And I got these trees at a native plant sale. Okay, so there it is, bare rooted. That came off quite easily. So I'll stick that in water until I'm ready to do the root pruning. Okay, into the water it goes. I've got 1 tree bare rooted, just 10 more to go. The soil the trees are in is really amazing. It just crumbles away like bonsai soil. It's really good soil. And so far I'm getting good root systems on these trees. Nice and radial, lots of fine roots. I'm not getting huge thick tap roots. All right, here comes another one. It's funny, I just found a peach pit buried in one of these pots. Interesting. Okay, let's keep going here. The bare rooting of the sugar maples is going well. I just have a few more to go. Cheers. I have got all the sugar maples out of the pots. You can see the pile of soil I'm left with here, full of weeds, so I'm glad to get rid of all the weeds. These trees were overwintered in the poly house out here, which is unheated. So that's where they spent the winter. And they look really healthy. All the buds are swelling. Looks like all of them survived. I'm going to begin now pruning the root system of all 11 trees, and I'll show you all 11 of the roots because I think it's an important first step in these seedlings becoming eventually bonsai trees, is that very first root pruning. So here I go. I'll pull them out of the bucket in random order. So here we go. So you can see this one, it came down, has a very large taproot that goes off to the one side. It's very far away from a flat radial root system. So on a root like this, which is very long and thick, I generally prune them in about half for the first pruning. So here I go. I'm going to prune this in half right here. Pruning off a large portion of the root system, but it definitely has enough roots to survive and continue growing. The next tree you can see has a fairly nice radial root system already, but it still has one thick taproot. So again, I'll come in and prune that right about here. Taking that off, I've got some long roots here I can take back like that. So that's the start of a good radial root system. The next tree, again, it has the start of a radial root system, but it has this taproot down here. So I just need to prune that back like that. And then there's this root here, needs a bit of pruning. It's getting a little long. There's a few roots that are too high in the root base here. I'll just take those off also. Prune that back a bit, and I think that is good for that tree. The next tree is similar, has a thick taproot that comes down. So again, I'll prune it in about half right here, taking the end off. That'll promote all these roots to develop, and it'll eventually get a nice radial root system. I'll just prune off a few of the longer roots here, making it a bit more compact, like that. So that's ready for planting. The next tree is a small tree. Again, it has that taproot coming off, so I'm going to take the taproot back to here. Prune off a few of these larger ones, or longer ones. And I think that's it for that tree. The next one is a larger tree. And this one that was the first one I pulled out. So it doesn't really have a taproot. I think it's been cut at one point. So this one we can be a little more selective on the roots. This one's too high, so I'm taking it off. We want, a root plane or a soil level. This one's too high, it's coming off. This one's too high, it's coming off. Then I'm getting down to a root plane here. I think I want my root system about here. So I am going to take this taproot back, taking a lot of roots off, like that. Prune the larger ones back, and I think that's good. That'll start a nice radial root system for this tree. The next tree, again, has the taproot going to one side, so I'll prune it back to here. And that's ready for planting. Here's another one, the same case. The taproot goes off to the one side. There's not a lot of fine roots up higher, so I'm going to prune it right here, like that. Doesn't leave a whole lot of roots on the tree, but there's enough. I think it'll grow quite fine. Here's a small tree. This also has a taproot coming off at an angle, so let's cut that back like that. That's good. Here's an interesting root. It goes down into the soil and then it curls back up, and it was actually air pruning. It was coming out of the soil here. So I'm just going to have to prune it off here, like that, keeping kind of the radial part of the roots, like that. Fixes that problem. Here's another one. These roots are too high. I'm just going to take those off. This tap root kind of ends. It's got a fairly radial root base, so I'll just take it back a bit. Taking the bottom part off like that. That's good. And that is all the trees. I do have my my peach pit in here. I can plant that and see if it grows. Peach pits, sometimes it takes a couple of years before the water softens up the outer shell and they germinate and grow. So I can try planting it, see what happens. Here is a look at all the roots I cut off these little seedlings. So I've got quite a pile of roots here. And then here's the trees over here ready for planting. I think all will survive. They all had enough roots to get them through this spring. My 11 sugar maples are all ready for planting. However, I've run out of bonsai soil, so I'll have to mix up a fresh batch to fill my seed tray. I'm all ready to mix up my soil. Always wear a mask because the dust isn't good for your lungs. Okay. I've added a little more perlite to the mix. I try and get it about 50-50. 50% safety zorb, 50% perlite. I think that's pretty close. Next, I'm going to add some fir bark to it. I add about 10 to 20%. In this case, I think it'll be closer to 10% because I'm running out. Okay. That's all I got. Mix that in. I'm going to add a base layer of soil to the bottom of my seed tray. Now these holes are fairly large, so what I'll do is kind of sift it until I get some coarse particles in the bottom of the tray. So here I go. And I can just kind of sift out the finer particles. Add some more soil. You see it coming out the bottom. Looks like I'll be left with more perlite than turfus. So that should be pretty good as a layer of soil in the bottom of the pot. I don't think it'll fall out the holes anymore. So now I'll add a little more soil. About half filling the tray. That should be about the right planting depth for the sugar maples. I think that's good. I'm back in the greenhouse ready to plant the sugar maples. It doesn't really matter at this point in time how I arrange the trees. They're just early in development, but I might as well try and arrange them in a pleasing manner so they look the best they can when it comes fall and we see all that nice fall foliage. I'm going to arrange the trees from tallest to smallest. That's all the trees. Thickest to thinnest, if that works out. So, I think the thickest maple is this one. So that's number 1. Number 2, I think, is either this one or this one. This one's taller, so we'll plant that as number 2. This will be number 3. Number 4, which is taller than number 3. Maybe we'll switch those around like that. Now we're coming down in height quite dramatically here. It's a little taller, but we'll get some random variation here. I think something like that is quite good. There's a look at all the trees now arranged. So generally, you know, the taller, thicker ones, it's a genetic characteristic of the seedling. So they generally stay in these proportions. The tallest ones always stay strong and tall, and the smaller ones always grow a little smaller and more weakly. So if you plant the forest in a pleasing arrangement, over the years they generally kind of stay in those proportions because of the growth rate of the seedlings. You can see that effect in my sugar maple forest here. The smaller trees, you know, still grow quite modestly, whereas the larger, thicker trees are growing like crazy and need pruning already. So again, you know, the proportions are staying true in this forest. The weaker trees stay smaller and the larger trees grow huge. There's a cat in our backyard out there. That's probably what the chickens were all clucking about. I'm ready to begin the planting, so I'll start with that number 1 tree. I'll put the branch to the outside of the forest like that. Plant it a little, I think, something like that, I think. Now I will have to just comb out the roots here, make sure they're radial, like that. And I'll put a pile of soil around it to hold it in place. Lift it up a bit to get those roots to flow down nicely into the soil. So there's one tree planted. The next tree is taller, but you know, I can always prune it. It's a little skinnier. Again, I'll just roughly arrange these in some kind of a forest planting, maybe an asymmetrical triangular shape, which always looks good in the forest. Maybe a small one back here, up here. Small one in the front, and one more back in the back. Like that. Okay, let me stand back and have a look at the planting. Here's a look at the trees in the pot. Well, that doesn't really look like anything, does it? Other than just a random bunch of seedlings in a pot. I think it's okay though. Let's just go with it. I mean, I think that'll work. Each tree has a bit of space. There's some arrangement of them. And I think they'll do quite well. So let's fill it in with soil now. I don't think I need to get too fussy at this stage about arranging the forest. I think the important thing is to get the trees in good bonsai soil and get them growing nicely, trying to get that nice radial root system. Okay. I think that is a good soil level in the pot. The trees are planted nicely. I think it's time to give them a water. Get that one a little more upright. Okay, let's get them watered. All right, here I go with the water. These trees will be very happy, I think, in this soil. Maybe I'll get maple syrup from them someday. A little thimble of it. So it takes 40 parts of sap to make 1 part maple syrup. So you have to boil it down 40 liters to get 1 liter of maple syrup. And I have made my own maple syrup before. I tapped some trees and boiled the syrup down, and it was really, really tasty. I'll keep the trees well watered, making sure they don't dry out. And it should be exciting seeing them come out into leaf this spring. Okay, I think that's good with the watering. The work today is not finished. I still have my peach pit to plant. I have a pot here that I plant seeds in, and you can see there's 3 germinating now, and I have no idea what these are. So I'll stick the peach pit in here, and maybe, now is that the right way? No, I want to put it in this way. The way it grows on the tree, pointy end down. Cover it up, give it a water. And maybe someday I'll have a little peach tree. Well, my cup is empty, but my seed tray is full. I really enjoyed working on the sugar maple seedlings today, getting them out of those little tiny pots full of weeds and into a nice forest planting. That is all for today. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me in the Bonsai Zone.